Super, so that's a bit of housekeeping and now we can get started. So number one, first thing to do, I would suggest, is when you're in your account, is to have a look and run your annual return under the year-end menu. So menu options are down the left-hand side. Year-end is here. Now at the moment, I've got my fictitious Scribe account set to income and expenditure. If you're working in receipts and payments, you can just go directly in and click in to run the annual return. So just click the menu option, it will appear. If you see a red error message at the top, you know you've got a problem. Okay. If you're in income expenditure, before you do that, you must run calculate. So calculate will take the figures in Scribe as they are, because Scribe works on a receipts and payments basis throughout the financial year with the conversion done to income and expenditure as part of the year-end process. So that's what calculate is basically doing for you. You can run calculate whenever you want, and I would suggest you do that as part of this process because it will check that the opening balances are all there ready to go. You'll see I've just done that. Just simply click start and I got green messages at the top. If you see green messages, then what we're saying is Scribe is happy with the opening balances that you've given it. It all matches up. It's got all the information it needs in order to run the figures through. Obviously, we'll just still suggest that you just check everything matches to what was submitted, because it is possible to put things in that balance that aren't the same. But in essence, you've got everything that you need in terms of your opening balances. If when you click that button you see red or orange messages, it means something is missing. And normally that's either because there are no opening balances entered in, either because you're a new user and you haven't put them in, or if you had Scribe last year, you haven't copied them over, or there's something missing. So when it's checking in the background that it's got all the information it needs, it's not all there. So I would suggest you run calculate. As I said, you can run calculate as many times as you like. And it's also something that once you get into the year-end process, we recommend getting into the habit of doing before you look at the reports, because you want to make sure they're completely up to date with everything that you've put into the system. But once you've done that, you can then run the annual return. And again, as I said, if there is a problem, it will be very, very obvious. You're going to see a large red message at the top here that says something like your accounts do not balance. So you would need to resolve that before you then proceed. So it's best to look at that now, because obviously the figures that are going into the end of the year will continue as you start doing more transactions. But really, this is checking, have we got the correct opening balances? So you can see I've run this in. Mine hasn't got any errors. So in terms of where I am at the moment, I'm happy with that. But if you have got a red message at the top telling you something's wrong, often it will be because this left-hand side is blank. If it's all zeros, then Scribe is saying there are no opening balances. It doesn't match up because it's zero. And that's probably because you haven't copied last year over or put anything in. So to recap on that, I'll show you where you can fix that. And if you do have any problems or you think you've put the correct figures in and you're still getting an error, please just pop us an email. You can contact us using the little box in the corner, or send us an email at hello@scribeaccounts.com, and we can just have a look and advise you, what's missing, where it's gone wrong. But in terms of the setup menu, down here on the left-hand side, restate last year is where those figures are entered in. So this would be if this was your first year on Scribe, because obviously to start off, you need to enter in those opening balances. So it's got that starting position and the figures go into here. So I'm not going to spend loads of time on this because this is covered in this sort of initial setup and some of the things the other help documents. But as a recap, and if you can't resolve it, do ask the question. So cash at bank is your box 8 figure. And remember, sometimes the error can come from simply the fact that you've put up a rounded amount, because when you complete your accounting statements that get submitted on the AGAR, they will ask for rounded figures. If you simply type that in from box 8 and it should have had pence on the end, that will give you an error, because Scribe needs to check in the background that your individual opening bank balances, which of course must have pence on them so that it reconciles, matches to this figure. So do make sure that you enter the pence into here. This is box 7 under funds. So again, your box 7 from your annual return on your AGAR with pence, and it must be a sum of your capital earmarked in general fund. So if you've got reserves and you split them out. If you haven't split them out yet, or you haven't done so on Scribe, then just make sure the same figure just sits in the general fund. So the total box 7 is just the same as the general fund figure, because again, it will give you an error if this doesn't match up. These other ones will only appear here if you're an I&E. So in receipts and payments, you're really concerned about the bank figure because that's the key element. There is a tab of assets, but I think I've only ever seen one instance where anybody had anything in here, so I wouldn't overly worry about that. This is nothing to do with fixed assets in here. Adjustments, so your creditors, debtors, etc. So your difference between your box 7 and a box 8 figure. Think about your balance sheet, those figures need to sit in here. And also your VAT position as well. So that must all be entered from your opening balances. So if they're not in there, then obviously make sure they are, that you enter them in and then run calculate to check that that's all correct. Or if something's missing or you can't quite work it out. And sometimes if you have a particularly complicated balance sheet and lots of entries, it can be hard to consolidate it. So do feel free to contact us for assistance with that one. So that would be if this was your first year on Scribe. If you had Scribe last year and you completed the year end and you used the figures from Scribe for your AGAR, then obviously it's all there. You just need to have copied it forward. So if I pop back into my previous year, I can do so by clicking on the financial year here and navigating back 24-25. Mine is locked. I can see that from this icon here. I've got the little padlock on the left-hand side. If you haven't yet closed your year, it's very likely that you're getting notifications or seeing information that you haven't done so. But if you haven't done so and therefore brought the figures over to become the prior year in what is 25-26, that is going to likely be causing you a problem. So just to recap very briefly on that, if you return to the year-end menu in the last year, I would suggest that you just run the annual return to make sure that it does actually match to what was submitted, because occasionally we do see things have changed and you don't want to bring something forward that's different. Obviously, if there is any restatement happening, again, you might want to ask for help with that, particularly if you are moving from receipts and payments to income and expenditure. There is a little bit of extra work you need to do that. Normally takes us around 30 minutes and we'd hold a session to do that with you. So again, let us know if you're in that scenario. Other than that, though, you can check that the annual return has the figures as they were submitted, and then it's just a case of going to close accounts at the bottom, as you can see here. If you're working in income and expenditure, you will have 3 tick boxes. If you're in receipts and payments, you will have 2. You'll both have close accounts, which will basically is what puts the padlock here and locks them down. It means you can't go back into last year and add any information, edit any information. Now, it's not reversible. So if you've locked it and then you realise you need to change something, you absolutely can unlock. And that's why we tend to recommend that once you've completed or you believe you've completed your year end, just go and lock everything. You don't have to have necessarily had everything back from the external auditor. Just lock it. If something does happen and you need to change it, you can do so. But what it just means in the meantime is that it's less likely that you're going to go and get any inadvertent changes. You know, we occasionally do get people who said, oh, I accidentally added transactions in last year, or my colleague's gone and put some data in or changed something. Obviously, we want to guard against that from happening. And then the other 2 boxes at the bottom, one box if you're in receipts and payments, is basically the year-end data. So the annual return information will, by ticking this and confirming, was what copies that over and then populates the prior year column in the next financial year. So you would just click confirm, you see a green message to tell you that's happened successfully, and then you can navigate back to the current financial year and just check. Remember to calculate if you're an I&E, but if not, you can just directly run that annual return. And what you should see as a result of doing that, your prior year, so this left-hand column, will now be populated. And if you did have a red error message, it should have disappeared and that will resolve it. But as I said, if you've got any uncertainty or you can't quite work your figures out, just let us know.